Okay, well, let's get things underway. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Rick Wycheck, the director of NAEHS and the National Toxicology Program. So welcome to the 166th meeting of the National Advisory Environmental Health Sciences Council. So again, pursuant to the Government in the Sunshine Act, all aspects of this meeting are open to the public except for the review, discussion, and the evaluation of grant applications and related information. So let me turn the virtual podium over now to the Deputy Director of DERT. Pat, the podium is yours.
Okay, thanks, Rick. I'd like to start off by allowing council members and members of our senior leadership committee to introduce themselves. I'll call your name and I'll ask you to introduce yourselves and your affiliation, if you would, please. So I will start with Dr. Phil Bourne.
Yes, hi, I'm Phil Bourne. I'm the founding dean of the School of Data Science and a professor of biomedical engineering at the University of Virginia.
Terrific, thank you. Lynn.
Hello, everybody. I am Lynn Goldman, and I am Dean of Public Health at the George Washington University.
Okay, Irva Hertz-Pichotto.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Irva Hertz-Pichotto. I'm at the University of California, Davis, and I direct the Environmental Health Sciences Center.
Dr. Holian.
Andre Holian, Director of Center for Environmental Health Sciences at the University of Montana.
Dr. Ingram.
Good morning. I'm Gianni Ingram from Northern Arizona University, where I'm a Regents Professor in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry.
Thank you. Dr. Kavanaugh.
Hello, Terry Kavanaugh. I'm a Professor Emeritus in the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences at the University of Washington and Associate Director of our NIHS Core Center.
Thank you. Dr. Miller.
Hi, Gary Miller. I'm a Professor of Environmental Health Sciences at Columbia University.
Dr. Penning.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Trevor Penning. I'm Professor of Pharmacology at the University of Pennsylvania, and I also direct our P30 Environmental Health Sciences Core Center.
Thank you. Dr. Perez Lugo.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marla Perez Lugo, and I am a Professor of Sociology at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley.
Thank you. And Dr. Vasquez, excuse me.
Hello, Karen Vasquez. I am a professor at the University of and Division Head of Pharmacology and Toxicology and Director of a Molecular Oncology Program for the Livestrong Cancer Institutes at the University of Texas, Austin, and Dell Medical School.
Okay, thank you. And our ex officio members, Dr. Sabulis.
Good afternoon, it's Bill Sabolis. I am a senior advisor for both the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's National Center for Environmental Health, as well as the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry.
Okay, thank you. Not with us today is ex officio member, Dr. Andrew Geller from the EPA. All right, so let's go around and introduce our senior leadership. Rick has introduced himself, so I'll ask Dr. Archer, could you introduce yourself, please?
Good afternoon. I'm Trevor Archer, the Deputy Director of NIEHS.
Thank you. And Dr. Zeldin.
Hi, I'm Daryl Zeldin. I'm Scientific Director for Division of Intramural Research at NIEHS.
Dr. Berridge.
Afternoon, everybody. I'm Brian Berridge. I'm the Scientific Director for the Division of the National Toxicology Program.
I don't believe Jan Hall is on. Is Michelle Bennett on? If not, I will ask Dr. Coleman to introduce yourself, please.
Hi, everyone. This is Gwen Coleman. I am the Director of the Office of Scientific Coordination, Planning, and Evaluation.
And
Adam, I up to introduce Dr. Belshaw?
Not yet. How about Mitch Williams?
Okay, I'm sorry, Mitch.
Good afternoon. I'm Mitch Williams. I'm the Acting Associate Director for Management for NIEHS.
All right, now Rick, it's you.
Okay, great. And I will go into more details on this, but I would like to introduce to all of you the Acting Director of our Division of Extramural Research and Training, Dr. David Belshaw. And now we'll go through more of the details with David on David's appointment in just a couple of minutes when I'm giving my director's presentation. So David, welcome to the SLC.
Thank you very much, Rick.
Okay, Pat, you went on mute.
Just trying to be polite there. Okay, thank you. I have a few housekeeping items. I will just remind everyone that we will be not having a break for lunch today. If you need to take a break, please do so at your own timing. This is because we have having coast to coast people today, so it's kind of hard to find that right time. Just a couple of notes about virtual meetings. You all are probably aware of most of these housekeeping kind of rules. First off, we ask that you mute your microphone when you're not speaking and don't unmute until you're called upon to speak, just to keep the chatter down. And we also ask that when you're not speaking, you turn off your video and so that you save some bandwidth there. And then I would also like to remind everyone that this is a public meeting and it is being webcast to the public. So members of the public who may wish to express their views regarding any items discussed during the meeting may do so by sending an email to council using the address listed on the council webpage, which the email is national.advisory.council@niehs.nih.gov. You can check with us during the meeting, or if you want to check with us after, we'll try to get back to you as quickly as we can. The next item is the consideration of February 2022 meeting minutes. These minutes are available on the NAEHS Council webpage, and council members were asked to review them before the meeting. They're also included in the electronic council book for members. So I need a motion to approve these minutes from one of the council members, please.
So moved.
Okay, and a second?
Seconded.
Any discussion? If not, any abstentions? If not, I will ask council members to vote for approval of the minutes in their council book. While we're waiting for folks to do that, it looks like I do have Jan Hall on. Dr. Hall, if you would like to introduce yourself as a member of senior leadership.
Yes, hi, thanks, Pat. Welcome, everybody. I'm Janet Hall. I'm the clinical director at NAEHS.
Thank you. Did I miss anybody? Anyone I should have introduced? I don't think so. Has everyone finished voting? If so, I will just move along to say that in your materials you received, it has the future dates of our council meetings, and this will be also on our website as well. If there's no further business upfront things, I will turn the podium back over to Rick for his director's report.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Pat. And so again, welcome everyone. And so let's go to the next slide. So with input from several of you, and most notably some of the new members of council, I've decided that I'm going to try out a new format for the director's report. It's a format that I hope you will find to be more engaging. So once we finished, you can give me some feedback and let me know if this is an improvement or whether you want me to go back to what I was doing previously. So as I've mentioned in the past, I've established the what we call the OSI, the Office of Science Strategy here at Scientific Strategy and Innovation here in the OD at NAEHS. So Michelle Bennett, who is hired as the head of this new office, has been convening monthly retreats and has also been working with many of you in the extramural community to develop strategies to support the 5 leadership values that I've discussed with you in the past. And I guess in this case, most notably the collaboration and the innovation leadership values. So with this new format, I hope to be engaging with all of you, and I want to hear your advice and get your input on the strategies that we're developing and the progress that we're making. So next slide. So now I, of course, want to spend some time on the strategies, but there are a few things that I suspect you're interested in. So I thought it would be also important to update you on the budget, some of the legislation that is relevant to the work at NIH and the NIEHS, as well as some changes in leadership here at NIEHS. And then we'll talk about some of those strategies that we're developing across several different areas of scientific focus, And we'll also talk about some of the work we're doing on ending structural racism and diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility at NAEHS and the NIH. And we're also going to talk about follow-up from a topic we discussed last time, which is report back of research results. We've made some progress on that. So let's go to the next slide. So on the issue of budgets, well, it took Congress almost 6 months to pass a budget for the current fiscal year. In the end, it was good news for the NIH. Like most of the other ICs, we received a 3.4% increase for our primary allocation. Although it's a little disappointing, the Superfund received only a 1.23% increase. We'll see what we can do to try to fix that in the future. Our DOE allocation stayed at about the same level of $10 million. So when you add it all up, it puts us just short of $1 billion at about $935 million. So we were hoping, as you can see in the histograms to the left, we were hoping to get a $100 million increase in our base, specifically to support climate change and health research. This was part of the president's budget, and it was in the budget for the Senate and the House, but in the end, it didn't come through, and we're not really quite certain why, but it didn't come through. But nevertheless, as you can see all the way on the right, it's back in the budget for the president's budget for FY23, so we've got our fingers crossed. And hopefully it will come through in FY23. So, but we have to wait to see what happens in both the Senate and the House. Next slide. So we've had a couple of congressional briefings since the last time we met. The first briefing was in February 16th. Dr. Coleman briefed Senator Blunt's and Senator Kuhn's staffs on the implementation and research related to the Global Child Thrive Act implementation, and this was done with NIMH, NICHD, and the CDC. So Dr. Coleman spoke about our NIEHS WHO Collaborating Center, the network of WHO Collaborating Centers for Children's Environmental Health, and the Venda Health Examination of Mothers, Babies, and Their Environment study, which we fund on pesticide exposure and health outcomes in pregnant women and children. So the second briefing was on May 3rd. So that's where I met with the House and Senate majority and minority staffs. That's something we call the Four Corners. This involved the Interior, Environment, and Appropriations subcommittees. So I talked about the work of our Superfund related programs, and I was joined for this briefing by Trevor Archer, Bill Sook, and Sharon Beard. So overall, I thought it went very well. It's always a great opportunity to get in front of key members of the staff of key members of Congress to let them know what we're doing for at NIEHS, specifically for our Superfund research program. Next slide. So I also want to point out that on May 11th, Dr. Tabak testified before the House Labor HHS Subcommittee on the FY23 NIH budget. So he was accompanied by Dr. Fauci, Dr. Lowy, who's the acting director of NCI, as I'm sure most of you know, Dr. Gibbons, Dr. Bianchi, and Dr. Volkov. And as you can see, there were a whole range of different topics that were covered in the hearing, which included health disparities, ARPA-H, interactions with HBCUs, NIH SEAL, the ECHO study, and many others. So one highlight to the related to NIEHS work was Congressman Josh Harder from California asked a question related to the NIH's research relating to asthma and air pollution. So Dr. Gibbons, who you may recall is a member of the Executive Committee for Climate Change and Health, was able to expand on the efforts across the NIH relating to climate change and health in his response. So it was good to get that in front of Congress. Next slide. So on Tuesday, May 17th, Dr. Tabak testified to the Senate Labor, so this was the Senate Labor HHS subcommittee on the FY23 NIH budget. And for this briefing, he was joined by Dr. Fauci, Dr. Gordon from NIMH, Dr. Gibbons, Dr. Hodis from NIA, and Dr. Volkov. So it was encouraging that Chair Murray and Ranking Member Blunt, in their opening statements, they spoke of the bipartisan effort to increase funding at the NIH, which is really good news. They also comment on the importance of supporting our nation's biomedical research enterprise. So clearly they have their priorities right in order. So the hearing also covered numerous topics, as you can see here, including precision medicine, pandemic preparedness, autoimmune diseases, how the NIH is engaging early stage investigators, as well as many other topics, as you can see on the slide. So let's go to the next slide. Now, there have been a number of questions that have come up around ARPA-H, or it's the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health. So therefore, I thought what I would do is take just a few minutes to discuss ARPA-H, and I'm using some of the slides that we were provided by Dr. Tabak's office. So ARPA-H is it's a new paradigm for supporting high-impact biomedical research. The draft mission is to benefit the health of all Americans by catalyzing health breakthroughs that cannot be readily accomplished through traditional research or commercial activity. So ARPA-H will support transformative, high-risk, high-reward biomedical research in a way that will embrace a sense of urgency to speed application and implementation of breakthroughs at various levels, with projects that range from the molecular to societal. So it will work to build capabilities and platforms that are broadly applicable across a range of disease and conditions. So ARPA-H aims to leverage the approach that was pioneered at DARPA, and it's being created as a distinct and a bold entity within the NIH that will have autonomy, independence, resources, and the authorities to tackle some of the biggest challenges facing human health. Next slide. So ARPA-H will be a component of the NIH. It will draw on the vast knowledge, the expertise, and the infrastructure that exists within RSICs and across the NIH. However, ARPA-H will have its own unique culture, its own unique organization, and its autonomy. So like the NIH, ARPA-H will seek to bring in the most innovative people with novel ideas. And it will aim to be nimble and lean in its organizational structure. But unlike the NIH, it will operate under time-bound principles for both programs and for the tenure of the staff. For example, the director will not be a permanent employee of ARPA-H. So ARPA-H will be open and transparent about its processes and approaches, and grantees will be held to a high degree of accountability around ambitious milestones and metrics. And as I understand it, just like DARPA, project officers will pull funding midstream if the milestones and the metrics are not met. So specifically, they'll be looking for projects that offer a strong impact on return, and they will accept failure as a normal and expected component of operations. So that brings kind of a novel feature to the way we support high risk, high reward work. Next slide. So you may have seen that OSTP and the NIH published a commentary in Science outlining a vision for ARPA-H. So starting in the summer of 2021, there were information sessions and numerous meetings with different organizations. There were also 16 listening sessions that involved over 5,100 different participants from patient advocacy groups, industry, and scientific professional organizations, and they gave a lot of feedback. So the current status of ARPA-H is that it is funded at the level of $1 billion, which will be available over the next 3 years to launch this new program. So this will cover a presidentially appointed director who will report to the Secretary of HHS. And on April 14th, Secretary Becerra officially transferred ARPA-H to the NIH. And as I mentioned, it's meant to function as an independent entity within the NIH. Dr. Adam H. Russell has been appointed as the acting deputy director. So Dr. Russell is currently the chief scientist at the University of Maryland's Applied Research Laboratory for Intelligence and Security. He begins his new role this month and will guide the early stages of building the administrative structure for ARPA-H and for hiring initial operational staff. So in order to ramp up ARPA-H, the president requested $5 billion in his proposed FY23 budget. So we'll have to see what eventually comes to pass. Next slide. Okay, let me move on to discuss some of the leadership changes. So I gave you a hint about Dr. Belshaw. Well, first of all, I just want to let you know that Dr. Maston, who is serving as the acting director of the ERT, is kind of finishing things up today with his presentation for the ERT. He has to step back to his position of reference as the deputy director of the division. So therefore, I made the decision to appoint Dr. Belshaw as the acting director of the ERT. So many of you know David. He has agreed to stay on in this role until the next permanent director of the ERT can be identified. And that search, by the way, is currently underway, and hopefully we'll have some candidates that will be interviewing for the job here in the next several weeks. David has over 2 decades of experience in DERT, and has served as the chief of the Exposure Response and Technology branch for the past 9 years. So he's played a key role in the Exposomics program at NAEHS, and he knows the division, he knows the staff, and is committed to providing strong interim leadership for the division. Most importantly, that he, together with the rest of the senior leadership committee, including myself, have absolutely embraced the DEIA principles and is committed to making sure that all voices are heard within DERT. So welcome again, David. So let me also take a moment to thank and acknowledge Dr. Maston for his service. So Pat, we all appreciate all the efforts you put into providing interim leadership for the division. And this goes all the way back to the early days when I was just took over as the acting director of NAEHS back in October of 2019. So thank you very much for everything you've done, and we can all give you a virtual round of applause. Okay, let me go on to the next slide. Now, I also want to announce to all of you that I have chosen the next executive officer for NAEHS. This is something we just made public yesterday. So you're learning about this soon after it became public. So the executive officer is Ms. J. Ingrid Mathis. So the search committee did an absolutely spectacular job and provided me with a highly diverse and exceptionally talented set of internal and external candidates. In the end, I chose Jay because of her remarkable administrative capabilities and the confidence that I have that she will bring considerable skills for reaching across all 5 divisions to coordinate our managerial support functions. So moreover, just like all of the other members of the senior leadership committee, I know that Ms. Mathis is committed to ending structural racism and to embrace DEIA across NAEHS. So welcome, Jay. And I also want to express my absolute deep gratitude to Mr. Mitch Williams for providing the strong interim leadership in the Office of Management. His work on helping us all stay safe over the past year, well, 2 years during the COVID pandemic was particularly noteworthy. So thank you, Mitch, for everything you've done. I have to say it personally, and I know I'm speaking for many of us, we've thoroughly enjoyed working with you. So we will give you a virtual round of applause. Okay, let's go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so let me move on now to discuss some of those areas that have come into strategic focus over the past couple of years since I've become the director. So as I mentioned earlier, Michelle Bennett has been working with staff across all the divisions, and she's been working with many of you in the extramural community. So her role as the senior advisor on strategic initiatives is to function as a catalyst and to develop strategies around the goals in our strategic plan. So these strategies involve developing, what are we going to be doing? When are we going to be doing this? And who will be involved and how much will it cost? So she has conducted many monthly retreats with the senior leadership committee, and we've now identified 5 areas of scientific focus that are shown on this slide. So we're still working on the details or these areas of focus, and I want to emphasize these are not the only areas of focus that we'll be working on. So they're the ones that simply have come into focus thus far. So we'll be taking up a broad revisiting of all the goals in our strategic plan when we engage in our next phase of the strategic planning next year. So Michelle is also working with the Emerging Science for Environmental Health Decisions, the ESEHD, which is a standing committee of the NAEHS, which is independently working on defining the future of environmental health sciences. So we'll have a lot of data to pull together as we anticipate updating our strategic plan. So let's go to the next slide, please. So this slide just is to remind you that you've heard about these areas of scientific focus. We discussed precision environmental health back in February of 2021. The Exposome in June of 2021, climate change and health at a special session of council in November of 2021. And you heard about the new plans in the division of the National Toxicology Program around mechanistic and translational toxicology by Dr. Berridge. He discussed this at our last meeting this past February. And today you'll hear more about the progress we're making around environmental justice and health disparities. Next slide. So this first area of focus on precision environmental health, and I first learned about this in the title of Precision Environmental Health when Dr. Cheryl Walker, Andrea Baccarelli, and Dana Dolan and I described this initiative at our meeting in February of 2021. So this program is all about recognizing that individuals respond to the environmental exposures in the environment in different ways. So this initiative dovetails nicely with the precision medicine program, which is connected with the 1 million person All of Us cohort at the NIEHS. The precision medicine program aims, it's a little different. It aims to use genome sequence as a tool to develop therapies for various adverse health effects in humans. But unlike the precision medicine initiative, the precision environmental health program is about understanding the individual risks to prevent disease. And as Dr. Walker described in her presentation, precision environmental health is about working at the intersection of genetics, epigenetics, environmental health, and data science. So she refers to this as the G by E by D program. And it's clear that PEH has many parts, and it will be a challenge to implement in all these different parts in a coordinated fashion. So let's go to the next slide. So for example, studying the genetics of as part of the Precision Environmental Health Program, it's complicated because most of the genetic predispositions that relate to differential responses to the environment fall into this broad category of complex traits. So these are the traits that are caused by sequence variations in multiple and potentially hundreds or even thousands of different genes. So in general, to study complex traits, large cohorts of potentially tens of millions of genetically diverse individuals will be necessary. So the international genetics community is organizing itself around how to develop collaborative strategies that will allow them to seamlessly integrate their data across different cohorts. So this global collaborative effort is referred to as the International Common Disease Alliance, or the ICDA. So the challenge ahead is how to integrate environmental exposures and epigenetics into the ICDA. And in the meantime, Michelle Bennett and Richard Kwok and Jan Hall and Alison Matzinger-Reif here at NIEHS and several of my other colleagues are working effectively to integrate environmental exposures and epigenetics into the 1 million person cohort at the NIH referred to the All of Us cohort. In fact, the new medical and scientific director of the program, of the All of Us program, Dr. Jeff Ginsberg, is spending a third of his time physically on campus with us here at NIEHS and is working closely with us to integrate environmental exposures into the All of Us program. So we're also working on our own program on precision environmental health here at NIEHS, and it's under the leadership of Jan Hall and Alison Matzinger-Reif. It's called the PEGS program for the personalized environmental genome study. So we'll have to figure out what are the best strategies to integrate environmental phenotyping, epigenetic analysis into the analysis of all the relevant cohorts across the environmental health sciences community. And I can't help but think that this will involve some creative thinking about how to establish new collaborative relationships to get the job done. Next slide. And as far as the E component of PEH is concerned, I believe we're all aware that the environmental health sciences community has embraced the exposome framework, which is about studying the totality of exposures over a lifetime. And the exposome concept recognizes that if we truly want to understand the impact of the environment on human health, we have to develop research strategies that move beyond studying single exposures. And it needs to include windows of exposure over the life course, especially during development. So the exposome involves studying the physical, chemical, the social, the ecosystems and lifestyle factors, and they all contribute to environmental exposures. Next slide. And as we heard from Gary, I believe we all know within the environmental health sciences community, we've been discussing the exposome since 2005. We made a lot of progress. And Dr. Wild originally proposed this concept in 2005, but what's been lacking is a clear experimental design of how to conduct an experiment in exposomics. So there's currently a lot of confusion on how to conduct an exposomics experiment. I know that that's true for many of the other IC directors across the NIH. So what data do we need to collect to conduct an exposomics experiment? So we've got to try to figure this out. And as we heard in June of 2021, Dr. Miller at Columbia University gave us a presentation, and together with many of his colleagues, he let us know that they've been thinking a lot about operationalizing exposomics. He's proposing that we need, and Gary, you can speak up for yourself during the Q&A, but I'm understanding you're proposing we need an operational definition of the exposome. And we'll likely need to build new technologies that will be necessary to capture the exposome. But he indicated that we need to study, I think what he called the pragmatic exposome, or to focus on what we can do now. So is there, for example, a way to deploy high resolution mass spectrometry to get the things done that we need to get done now? The next slide, please. So to actually make some things happen, Dr. Bennett, together with her colleagues here at NAEHS and across the environmental health sciences community, are planning to host a series of workshops where we can then shift from defining the exposome to actually doing it. We hope that these will help to shape the future of exposomics at the intersection of environment and health and disease research. Next slide. So Michelle and her colleagues are putting together a series of 5 virtual workshops using this open space concept. The first is on tools, technology, and methodologies. The second is on biological responses and impact on health and disease. The third is on future of clinical and prevention trials, cohorts, and epidemiology. Fourth is on social and societal impacts. And the fifth is on data infrastructure and data analytics. So if you're interested, and I hope many of you are, you save the date, July 22nd, August 5th, 12th, 19th, and 26th. So more details will be forthcoming, but you might want to block this off in your calendars. I'm sure that they will be quite interesting. So again, thanks to Michelle Bennett and her colleagues in OSI for helping to coordinate all of this. Next slide. And finally, the D part of precision environmental health involves the integration of data across multiple different sources. So we have some big challenges. Phil, I know that you know exactly what we're talking about here. Big challenges along these lines across the global environmental health sciences community. So in my mind, it all starts with a comprehensive plan. So we've developed the office of, we created the Office of Environmental Science Cyber Infrastructure, or OESC. So Dr. David Fargo is the director of OESC, and Dr. Charles Schmidt is the director of the Office of Data Science within OESC. So they're working proactively to develop plans to enable the thoughtful integration of data across interdisciplinary, collaborative, and cross-cutting programs. And so once again, stay tuned. There's a lot of planning that needs to happen in the data coordination arena. So hopefully once this is done, we'll be able to enable exposomics, data-driven, knowledge-driven discovery, computational toxicology, and many other exciting areas of environmental health. Next slide. So another program that has come into focus over the past, especially over the past year, is the NIH initiative called Climate Change and Health. And as you hopefully remember from the special session of council that we had last November, we've done a number of things, including reaching out to 6 other IC directors, including Diana Bianchi, Gary Gibbons, Eliseo Perez-Stable, Josh Gordon, and Roger Glass and Shannon Zank. And together we formed what we are calling the Executive Committee for Climate Change and Health. So together we've re-energized a working group with membership from across the NIH. Next slide. So given the focus on environmental justice and health disparities at today's meeting, I think it's important for me to acknowledge that climate change differentially impacts communities of color, low-income populations, and we recognize it impacts immigrant groups and indigenous populations. It also differentially impacts farm and construction workers, persons with disabilities, those with life stage vulnerabilities, as well as individuals with chronic medical conditions. And of course, climate change differentially impacts populations in low and middle income countries, where there are higher rates of existing diseases, malnutrition, and extreme poverty. So we have to recognize this when we develop plans. Next slide. And again, as hopefully all of you remember the details, I'm not going to go through them today, but the working group has developed this strategic framework for climate change and health at the NIH. This is a framework based on a number of things, but most notably over 185 responses to an RFI that we issued last August. The framework is comprised of 4 different major elements centrally here, which include health effects research, health equity, training and capacity building, and intervention science. And at the center is a focus on multidisciplinary transformative research. The work will be conducted with global cross-sector interagency and community partnerships, and there will be a broad assortment of research types that will support the framework. This is shown as the cogs along this in the periphery of this diagram. ranging from basic mechanistic research to behavioral social science research, epidemiology and predictive modeling to adaptation research. Or if you're interested, I encourage you to visit the website we created. It's www.nih.gov/climate and health, one word. So give us some feedback. Next slide. And as you can imagine, after spending about 9 months working at breakneck pace to organize climate change and health, this strategic framework, it was a bit of a disappointment when the $100 million, what we call the catalytic funding, didn't actually come through in the FY22 budget. But nevertheless, the IC directors on the executive committee, as well as others outside the executive committee, including Tony Fauci, Lindsay Criswell at NIAMS, Ned Sharpless, Doug Lowy at the NCI, we all joined together to contribute sufficient funds to launch a number of foundational programs that we all thought would be critical to help set the stage for a future climate change and health research effort. So we all agreed that studying the health-related effects of climate change doesn't go away because we didn't receive $100 million in this catalytic funding in the FY22 budget. So hopefully you've already seen some of these funding opportunities that are shown in this slide. We issued a NOCI to encourage the use of common data elements and collection tools. And there's a NOCI related to the development of technologies and approaches to capture and reduce the effects of climate change and health. And you can see, I'm not going to go through all of this, but there are quite a number of ICs that have signed on to both of these NOCIs. Next slide. Actually, most notably, I also want to point out that we've issued an RFA to support a research coordinating center for climate change and health community practice. So this coordinating center will bring together multidisciplinary researchers and trainees to conduct solutions-driven research, all on the impacts of climate change. And as you can imagine, we have a lot of interest in community engagement. So we will also be supporting the Community Engagement Alliance for Climate Change and Health, which we will expect will promote community engagement research partnerships. This is called the ACE-CCH, and will ensure the inclusion of underserved and racial and ethnic minority and rural populations, and will build on the successful SEAL program for community engagement that was established for COVID-19 research. So stay tuned. If you are interested, plan to look for this announcement for the ACE-CCH sometime this week. So overall, as I mentioned, we are encouraged that the $100 million for climate change and health is currently in the president's FY23 budget. And we have our fingers crossed that the $100 million will come through. This catalytic funding will come through in FY23. Next slide. And I also want to point out to you, those of you in the intramural program, that the executive committee is also considering a modest size NIH-wide intramural program, which would be no more than 10% of whatever allocation we eventually get. So our scientific director for DI, or Division of Intramural Research, Daryl Zeldin, recently described at an executive committee meeting a new competitive funding program. They're calling it the ITCH, for the Intramural Targeted Climate Change and Health Program. So ITCH will provide seed funding to stimulate research activities across multiple ICs. Daryl is also making the case that we need to establish a new branch dedicated to climate change and health. And he and the other SDs feel that it's important to build infrastructure within the intramural programs across the NIH that are focused on climate change and health research. So stay tuned. If we hope we get the funding, hopefully we'll be able to put some of that catalytic funding into the intramural program. Next slide. So there's a lot to cover here. In the meantime, as we're waiting for things to happen, we're planning new initiatives. And Dr. Coleman and other members of the working group are vigorously forging partnerships with other agencies, the federal government, and with organizations across the globe. And again, I don't have time to get through all of these things shown on the slide, but we're getting the word out about studying the health-related effects of climate change and why it's critically important. So stay tuned and help us get the word out. And if you have questions about what to get the word out on, just let us know where contact went. Next slide. I also want to point out Aubrey Miller and Josh Rosenthal from Fogarty International are providing superb co-leadership of that NIH-wide working group. Another area of considerable interest over the past couple of years has been environmental justice and health disparities research. So NAEHS has a long history of studying environmental justice, and I recently met with Ken Olden, and he mentioned to me that NAEHS was one of the first agencies to put money on the table to help support research in the area of environmental justice. But even though we've done a lot, we feel that there is a lot more that we can be doing. So therefore, the Senior Leadership Committee launched an effort to develop a cross-divisional planning team. And this planning team is charged to explore how we might develop research strategies that build on our past accomplishments in EJ and health disparities. The planning group has hosted a couple of workshops on EJ and health disparities, and they're going to plan to have additional workshops. They brought together members of the environmental justice communities, including many of them close to the Superfund sites in our own backyard here in Central North Carolina. And I'll tell you, I received an earful from these community members. So they specifically indicated to me that they're tired of bringing up their concerns to me, and they want something to get done to clean up their communities. So therefore, the working group is now strategizing to figure out how we can bring the capabilities of the EHS research community to address the needs of these EJ communities. So it's complicated because we are mandated by Congress that NIH doesn't do what we do is we do research, we're not engaged in remediation. So I will be very interested to see what the working group in concert with all of you participating in these workshops, what we can all come up with that's within the scope of our mandate that addresses the concerns of our EJ communities. So, and they're in desperate need of more work from us. Next slide. And as mentioned several times in the past, I've discussed the Unite committee to you many different times. This is really the efforts to address structural racism. So it's the persistence of the racial and ethnic inequities at NIEHS and across the NIH. It makes it clear that the previous efforts that we made have not been sufficient and that we need a new approach. So therefore, starting back in 2020, soon after the death of George Floyd, Dr. Collins initiated this Unite initiative. And I want to remind all of you that the Unite committees the Unite committees that are shown here are important. They're an important mechanism that the NIH is using to address structural racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and accessibility. So if you're not aware of the Unite initiative, and I've discovered recently in some of my travels that many of you are not familiar with Unite, I encourage you, please get on the Unite website and take an opportunity to educate yourself. Unite's not going away, and it's going to continue to serve as a framework to establish an equitable and civil culture to reduce barriers to racial equity across the biomedical research workforce. The I Committee specifically is co-chaired by our Deputy Director, Trevor Archer, and it seeks to change the NIH organizational culture and structure to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout the NIH workforce. And it's there to make sure that they're absolutely working, and Trevor's making sure that there are specific metrics associated with the work of Unite. So last November, the I Committee charged all NIH institutes and centers to embark on what is called the Racial and Ethnic Equity Plan, or REAP process. Next slide. So first of all, the REAP process involves the necessary education so that staff across the NIH recognize the need for a new approach. We need to do things differently. And we need to adopt a racial and ethnic equity lens called the REAL, R-E-E-L. And we feel that the REAL will provide a framework to address inequities. The REAL has to be rooted in feedback, metrics, and transparency. So the second component of the REAP process is for leadership at NIEHS to commit to change through REAP. And let me assure you that I have done this together with all members of senior leadership, as well as leadership across the Institute. And then we need to work with staff across the Institute to implement on the plan. And once we have a plan in place, we need to manage and implement on that plan and make sure that everything is going as planned using the metrics. So Dr. Archer has established an NIEHS REAP working group, which has representatives from all NIEHS divisions, and they're working to apply the overarching goals of the REAP, and they're taking steps to determine which specific actions to take and how to measure progress toward achieving the goals in the program. So in the end, we've committed to identify and dismantle any racial and ethnic disparities at the NIEHS workforce. And we are working vigorously to enhance the diversity of the workforce. And I'm personally very committed to making sure that the Senior Leadership Committee has a composition that more accurately reflects the diversity of the workforce across the Institute. Next slide. And let me just finish with a cross-reference to a discussion that we had at our last meeting. It's about report back of research results. And we heard from a number of you, and most notably Julia Brody and Katrina Kaufmeyer, about the need for increasing transparency, building trust, promoting reciprocity, demonstrating respect, strengthening environmental health literacy, fostering engagement in research. And this will all come from reporting back of research results. So one of the questions that I posed to the group is, well, whose decision is it to make to start moving ahead on developing a research report back of research results strategy? So we're going to hear more about this in just a few minutes. Actually, we've got about 15 minutes where Liam O'Fallon, together with Julia and Katrina, will discuss some of the things we've actually done to make this happen. So I won't steal their thunder, but next slide. So let me just open it up for discussion. So if we can stop sharing the screen so we can see all members of council. So any and all questions? Feel free to give me feedback on the format. Was this more interesting or not? Okay, Phil.
Definitely more interesting. Thanks, Rick. Thanks a lot. And
terrific.
I really appreciate you picking up on comments that a number of us have made, I'm sure. So,
yep. See, I'm actually listening.
Well, that I knew. I do have a question just about ARPA-H and the interrelationship to the ICs and obviously NAEHS in particular. In terms of just a sort of example, if there's a sort of high-risk proposal that comes to the Institute, can that be passed up over to ARPA-H and vice versa for things that are more at the Institute level? I mean, I'm just curious about the general operation and the relationships between the two entities.
Yeah, Phil, that's a great question. And we don't need ARPA-H to offer up innovative and cutting edge, high risk, high reward proposals. But I'm not the authority on ARPA-H, so I'm just going to venture more of a guess. My sense is that the ARPA-H is an independent infrastructure within the NIH. So I don't think that there's going to be seamless transfer of grants that would come in through an IC and that it could be transferred over to ARPA-H if the IC decides that this may be a better fitting. And I think also when you're designing the proposal, you probably want to design it in a way that's more in alignment with some of the goals and the strategies for ARPA-H. So it'd be more like a DARPA proposal, which is very different than what you would submit for a typical NIH grant. So again, I'm not the authority on that. There are still things that are emerging, but my prediction is that seamless handoff wouldn't happen. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
But I'll take a moment to just encourage you and others. I know you've got a lot of ideas that you'd like to offer up to ARPA-H, and I know that many other members of council and members of senior leadership have a number of ideas that they would like to offer up to ARPA-H. So you'll be thinking about some of those transformative, high risk, high reward projects, but also be thinking about this in the context of the DARPA framework. They're going to encourage failure as opposed to some of the other approaches we have at the NIH. So bold, high risk, high reward that can have transformative effects. Trevor, I think you were next. Trevor Penning.
Oh, hi, Rick. I really like the new format. And I like the idea that we have half an hour to actually raise questions. I think this is great. I have two questions for you. One is on the climate change and health initiative in terms of the $100 million that we did not get. I'm wondering from your perspective whether or not there's an educational component here that's required. What I'm finding at my own university is a lot of interest in issues relating to sustainability, movement away from fossil fuels, but there seems to be less knowledge about the health effects of climate change. And I'm wondering that an educational component is going to be required to move the envelope.
Yeah, Trevor, that's a great question. And in fact, I can answer that, but I'm going to ask Dr. Coleman. I don't know, Gwen, where are you are you still there? I hope you're still
I
there.
am. I have turned my video on.
Yeah, do you want to just address this question? I know this is an area that you are personally very passionate about. And Trevor, I want to cross-reference that slide where I'm showing that we're getting the word out about the health effects of climate change. But Gwen, take it over here.
Thank you, Rick. And thanks for that question, Trevor. I agree. I think there's varying levels of literacy around the climate change and health issues in various places. Some universities have large climate change and health programs or centers that they've developed, and others are just beginning to recognize the need to do research in this area. So I wanted to bring to your attention that the NIH has a monthly webinar series that's open to the public, and we will be happy to share the flyer for the upcoming lecture, which is in the month of June, to this group and more broadly to our extramural community. That's a great way for staff, faculty, students at your university to, get the opportunity to listen to the leaders in the field. We are also, there are quite a number of conferences that we can share with you in order to, bring people up to speed. We can also have a separate conversation if there are particular lectures or educational things that would be of benefit to your university in particular. We're also trying to educate a variety of different stakeholders, and we would like the council members to also think about talking about climate change and health to people, community groups and other stakeholders that you normally interact with at your centers or through your other community and government liaison offices.
So Gwen, if I could just add, to respond to Trevor's comment here, Gwen and Josh and Aubrey have spent a lot of time with the working group and the steering committee of the working group developing that framework at climate change and health. So Trevor, I encourage you to share that with your colleagues. And if they want to know about the health effects of climate change, I think that the document and that cog diagram gives a really good kind of summary of what the health effects of climate change are all about. And if you find that there are deficiencies in the explanation, let us know. We're happy to modify that. So Trevor, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And I would say on that topic, Rick, our center is taking the lead on devoting our next symposium to climate change and health to actually tackle the educational component we think is lacking
at
our university. So we have it on a radar screen. I had one other comment that I wanted to make to you, which was related to the exposome.
Yep.
So you indicated in one of your slides that the pragmatic approach might be to use high resolution mass spectrometry to measure what we know we can measure now.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the challenge is to push the envelope, because if we want to understand individual risk, you have to ask the question whether high resolution mass spectrometry will be available for individual risk assessment at the population level, because it's expensive technology. So we need new technologies.
Mm-hmm. Well, Trevor, I just use high resolution mass spec as an example. And I see that Gary has his hand up. So Gary can actually speak for himself on this. I seem to recall that Gary used this as an example in his presentation in February 2021. But Trevor, I don't think anyone would disagree with you that we need new technologies, cost-effective technologies that will truly enable the exposome. But actually, Gary, I see you're next. Do you want to start with a response to Trevor's question?
So my hand was raised to comment about the climate and health piece, but I'll address Trevor's comment. I think this is one of these places where the technology has not been fit for the purposes of what we need. And I think that there's a lot that we can do that could very much drive down the cost. And in seeing the call from all of us about bringing the environmental measures into it, I think that technology could get to the point of being affordable to measure 500,000 or 1 million samples to get closer to that population level. But I totally agree. Like we need more technology development. And I think mass spec is just one of the examples of an approach that has great potential. But my question was more on this climate.
Gary, before you go on to talk about the climate change and ask that question, I'll just remind everyone, remember, we've got this ARPA-H program. And I'll bet that there are some ideas percolating between the ears of many of you that might be very appropriate to offer up as a innovative strategy to do climate change and health research. So I don't know, any comments about that, Gary?
Well, I mean, I think on the ARPA-H piece is that, when we look at DARPA, there's usually a specific call. They want to solve a problem of a particular thing. We don't know what those calls will be yet, so it'll be interesting to see how ARPA-H puts out calls, how focused they'll be, and how much creativity they'll allow in the application. I mean, DARPA clearly had a defense sort of mandate where they're trying to solve a particular problem, and I just don't know how ARPA-H will operate.
Well, let's stay tuned. Hopefully with these workshops over the course of the next several months, maybe we can define a real gap in our knowledge, our technological knowledge and capabilities. But anyway, sorry, Gary, go ahead and ask your question about climate change.
Following up on that climate and health piece is that I was, even though the initial funding hadn't come through, I was glad to see the posting of the announcements for projects because people have been thinking about this. But on the practical standpoint, when the budget hasn't changed, and there's no set aside funds for the climate and health work, and there's no set up study sections to review them, we now have to think about the expertise of the study sections in areas of research that have not historically been funded by NIH. And I just see a big challenge there in having, we might have expertise on air pollution or something, or some of the heat things, but some of the more unfunded projects are doing things that study sections don't have the expertise for. And I don't know if there's any plan of like the working group helping advise CSR on how to create the right sort of expertise, because they can't look at the NIH databases.
Gary, that's another great question. And Gwen, I'll bet you're sitting on the edge of your chair ready to answer that one. Is that right? Where are you?
What happened to me? Wait, I can't get my video back on, but
Okay.
I'm happy to talk. Anyway, yes, Gary, we all agree with you on that review issues. We have created a subcommittee with leadership from CSR and from NAEHS, and they have been thinking about this. There has been some recreation of study sections at least on the population side and community side of community-based research side that I think will be a better fit for things that are coming. But we are also sharing IC interests in these NOCs, and we will be discussing this in great detail with CSR. We obviously want the review to be as excellent as possible so we can fund as many outstanding grants as we possibly can.
Gary, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
And I have to really thank Gwen for being proactive on this. She recognized pretty early on that, well, she recognized the issue that Gary raised, and the next step was to have some conversations with CSR. And the CSR has been very, very accommodating, and as have many other IC directors. There are a number of climate change and health related grants in our current pipeline. So just bringing greater awareness to IC directors that they need to pay attention to these. So, and hopefully if we get that $100 million catalyst, again, just my comment would be, as $100 million is not a lot of money when you divide it by the NIH budget. So we're trying to figure out how do we use it in a catalytic mode to increase awareness, increase education, do a whole variety of different things defined by that strategic framework. And which also includes making sure that CSR is appropriately positioned to recognize these grants coming through. So Gary, again, thanks for asking that question. Terry, it looks like you have a question. Your hand is up.
Yes, thank you, Rick. I'm really enjoying this new format. I think it's a wonderful idea. Lots of great opportunities for discussion. So my question also relates to the ARPA-H, and I think this is a great opportunity for people to really put out bold initiatives that might have some great impact. I'm a little bit concerned about early stage investigators and the potential for, let's say, the yanking of funding halfway through could be kind of damaging and might discourage their participation. Oftentimes, some of the most innovative ideas come from people who've just started their careers and have a lot of really interesting approaches and tools and novel ideas. So I'm wondering regarding the institutes and how they're going to potentially handle something like that, would there be consideration at the level of the ICs to first of all, encourage junior investigators to participate and also in some ways to not have this become an albatross for them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Terry, that's another great question. And I guess my response is that it's less about the ICs than it would be around mentoring at your institutions. You know, I think the just like DARPA funding and ARPA-H funding, it's a risky business, and providing the type of mentoring to early stage investigators, do they want to engage in some of these very high risk, high reward projects? They're going to be time consuming, and best I understand that, and I don't know if any of you have had DARPA funding, but you're under a microscope with these project managers. So I would, if I were at a university, and as I had been in the past, I think I would advise and mentor early stage investigators to make sure that they cover all their bases, and that they have some secure NIH funding under their belt. Potentially at the same time that they would be offering up ARPA-H proposals. I don't know, how do the rest of you feel about that? It's a really good point, Terry.
Maybe it would be best to encourage those people to come in as a team with more senior investigators who can afford to potentially,
Yep. That's another approach.
Yeah.
So again, I see that less as an IC emanating from Rick than it is that, Terry, at the University of Washington, what are you going to advise early stage investigators? And I like the team model. That may be a very appropriate way to give early stage investigators a little bite of that highly competitive environment. And if they've got some really bold ideas, it'd be a way of presenting it up without risking, the possibility that they might lose their funding. So anyway, that's my thought on it. Yep.
No, Rick, I just want to support what you're saying, Rick, because I think that pre-tenure, that it's very risky to be engaged with anything where you can put in an awful lot of work and not even get a single publication out of it, which is very, very common with DARPA type work. Yeah. So I agree with you.
Great, thanks, Lynn. That's any other comments about that? I think it's a very important point. So no other comments. Pat, how are we doing on time? I hope that I structured my talk to give us plenty of time for a Q&A. Karen, I see.
Pat, go ahead. I think we're doing fine on time. We need to. We have the Liam part needs to come up in about 12 minutes. So you've got about 10 minutes.
Perfect. Great. So I was pretty much on time, about a half an hour. So Karen, I see you're next, and then Irva.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to your last question about junior faculty and high risk, high reward funding. At least in our college and division, actually in the entire university, there've been a lot of discussions about group team efforts. And while I think that's a fantastic way for junior faculty to get involved in something high risk, it also can be problematic in the sense that we've had a lot of issues with that, where the senior people tend to get more credit for those things. And so when it comes to tenure time, being part of a team for a junior faculty member won't get you tenured. So what we encourage is to have their own, as we call bread and butter, their basic mechanistic or translational or whatever their area of expertise, research grants as R01s, an R01 at least, and then get involved in these higher risk or group projects. But they have to have something of their own, we think, or for tenure, at least at our institution. Mm-hmm. So I think having both, working as a team, but also having their own, sort of tried and true research that they can keep funded as an R01.
Yep. So hopefully that's consistent with what the comments I was making. I think that having really strong mentoring. So I can imagine some early stage investigators with some bold ideas. They may be lured into these high risk, high reward projects. So that's where, again, I think having I'm a big fan of mentoring committees.
Yes.
So making sure
Yeah.
that
So we have
committees have a chance
requirements.
to
Yeah.
weigh in.
We have requirements for mentoring committees, not only for pre-tenured faculty, but also for associate professors and even full professors who ask for one. I was going to make one more comment about that as well. So with the junior faculty members, I think if there's a way also that they don't get too, so they come in with oftentimes great new ideas, but also great new techniques. And as long as they're not being utilized as just a technical component of something, I think that would also benefit them.
Right. No, that's another great point. So it's, I think it's a key points we all need to be listening to, that wise advice. Okay, thanks, Karen. Irva, you have your hand up.
Yeah. Oops, there we go.
Although we can't see you yet. We can hear you. There you are. Great.
I had it on and hit it off because it was
good.
slow. Yeah, I kind of want to go back a little bit to, I think maybe it was Gary who brought it up earlier, and the whole review process issue for climate change kinds of activities, which lend themselves to being extremely interdisciplinary. I mean, yes, you can do some very kind of focused sorts of research, but it's such a fluid, the actual environmental aspect of it itself. And then, there, every month there's like new issues around climate change that start to change the way, at least for me, I'm looking at some of the issues that we are trying to work around, for instance, around wildfires. So that nimbleness thing sort of kind of goes in the ARPA direction. But on the other hand, I think a lot of these research questions are not necessarily going to hit milestones in a really disciplined kind of regular way, because new tools and new, really difficult challenges are really arising. And so, I guess, and I just saw that this new set about NAEHS came out, and I'm wondering, will there be special emphasis panels for those? Because I found it a little confusing, because you're not supposed to apply under that new NAEHS, you actually apply under the old FOAs. So maybe it's a little too specific, but it's really that broader question of how to make it possible to do the really larger, and I noticed there weren't really any P grants in those NAEHS. So the question of really large interdisciplinary projects and how that does that really have to wait for the 2023 funding to actually be feasible? So
yeah, actually, Gwen, do you want to chime in here? There's a multifaceted question coming from Irva.
Yeah, Irva, you got a lot there that we could unpack for hours, and we'd be happy to talk to you about some of those offline. I would say a couple of things. First of all, we will be monitoring the submissions to the NAEHS, and we'll be working closely with CSR to understand the review issues and making sure that everybody gets to the right place. That's the starter. We decided purposefully at this point in time not to put every single mechanism that NIH has on the NAEHS, so it could have a little bit of more focus and opportunity, and it didn't overwhelm the system, given that we don't have an appropriation yet. So that's the other. Plus, this is out for 3 years, and we can make adjustments to it over time as things change for the 3 NAEHS. The other question about multidisciplinary work, as you see in the framework diagram, the core substance of what we're trying to do is to build unique transdisciplinary team and foster that kind of work. And you might remember in the concept clearance presentation that Claudia made, back in November, one of our dreams is to have a center type program where we build these teams and then have the teams work on what we're calling solution-driven science. So we have to be patient. We're doing one step at a time. We're building capacity. We're trying to tackle all of these areas of training, research, community engagement. And when we feel like all of those things have been launched, we'll move to the next step and hopefully we'll have an appropriation to match our dream.
Thank you, Gwen.
Sounds good.
Yes, I do want to have further comment.
Just along those lines too, we're going to be doing a lot of work to help to define the message about the health-related effects of climate change, and try to develop some talking points and then widely disseminate this to all of the potentially important stakeholders. So stay tuned on that. So Irva, does that answer your question?
Yeah, adequately for now. But actually, the last thing you said, I just wanted to comment on. This is something sort of a suggestion of a direction, which is educating our journalists around climate and health. And when I saw that 100 million disappear overnight from the budget, I just thought, well, it's just not obvious to most people that climate and health doesn't roll off the tongues of enough people at this point in time, and it's not it's starting to get out there into the media, but that maybe building some alliances with, there are organizations of journalists around around environmental health and some other issues, things like that. So that might be a place for the Institute to also think about investing in its communication strategies.
Irva, that's a great suggestion, and I think we have it covered. But so just stay tuned. And in fact, I'll be participating in a workshop in September in Boston, trying to better educate the journalist communities about the importance of the health effects of climate change. So we're getting out there, and if there are any other suggestions you have or anyone else has, feel free to email them to me, and I'll do our best to incorporate them into our planning processes. Okay, Phil, I see you have your hand back up again. Another question, comment?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just been festering over this issue about young investigators and innovation and the roles that funding agency versus the institutions have to play. I don't have a good answer to this, but it would, to taking this to the extreme, and I know no one on this call thinks it this way, but just to push out the point, it's the notion, well, don't worry about being particularly innovative until you've got tenure. Then you can start thinking about innovation. And I think that would be such an opportunity lost. And I don't think it, and I take your point, Rick, about mentoring and all that sort of thing. That's really important. But I think there is a synergistic role to be played here. And I was thinking about the analogy to what's happened in the data space, is that in that instance, when the agencies start ramping up their requirements for data, slowly but surely that trickles down to its value within the institution. So you could make the same argument about innovation, and ARPA-H is going to do that to some extent. But it'd be really good to see proposals that are requested that really go, that are really targeted at young investigators. Because it's a risk, yeah, but the prestige of getting one and so forth is sort of a counter. So I think my only point is that there's a synergy there between the academic institutions and the funding agencies to ensure that ARPA-H does the best it can do, including young investigators.
Phil, I think another great point. And I have to admit that when I was a young investigator, I was very anxious to get out there on these high risk, high reward types of things. It really gave me the energy to kind of come back for more, trying to always stay on the cutting edge. And actually when I started a career at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, there were mechanisms to actually support those types of things. So I have to admit, I know exactly what you're talking about. It was a real motivation for me personally. But I think I'm hearing from others, and actually a point that I'll make is that I was also being mentored, make sure I cover my bases. Because when tenure came up, and if that high risk, high reward project didn't pay off, you don't want to find yourself high and dry without publications and without funding. So it's a balance between the two, but I don't want to in any way imply that junior investigators ought to be purposefully steered away from these things. It just very thoughtfully engaging. I think it was Terry. Was it Terry that suggested maybe doing this in a team-based approach, where you have junior investigators working together with more senior investigators? Oh, Terry, did I get that right?
Yeah, I think that that's right. And in my case, in my career early on, I went for one of these very large grants that has to do with instrumentation grant. And you're only able to get those grants unless you have a very large team of people to participate, many of whom were very senior people. So I think that is a good way, I guess, of negotiating that. And also it's important that your departmental hierarchy administration recognizes that the value, I guess, of even trying, of nothing venture, nothing gain kind of attitude, but also to protect these junior people from not having so much commitment in these areas that they don't take care of business.
Yeah, well, I think very, very well said, and some great comments. So Pat, I'm looking at the clock. I think we're running up against time. Is that correct?
We're just a little bit, about 1 minute behind.
Why don't we take one last comment or question from Andre? So Andre, do you have a quick one?
Just more of a comment that we need to make sure that we integrate the communication with the lay public into this whole cycle. You mentioned journalists before, but it is the public that has the power to influence policy by influencing the lawmakers to then impact all the other things downstream. It's all an interconnected cycle. That's my only comment.
Yep, another really great point. So there are lots of different stakeholder groups that need the message, and the message needs to be articulated in a way that's appropriate for the knowledge of the stakeholder group. It's these are, all of the initiatives we're talking about are powerful initiatives. We want to make sure that people understand why they're really important. Okay, Pat, I think we better turn things over to we have 15 minutes carved out to talk about report back of research results. So let me turn it back over to you.
Yeah, John, actually, I'm going to ask John to pull up Liam's slides. And Liam, I assume you're somewhere to be found. I would just also mention, relative to our last discussion here, there was a fairly active chat going on in the chat. So I recommend that people, if they haven't looked at that they do so. Liam, are you available?
I am here, Pat.
All right, if you will take off. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot, Pat. Good afternoon, council members and everybody who's watching. And thank you, Rick, for the introduction to this brief update. As you may know, my name is Liam O'Fallon, and I work in the Population Health Branch in the Division of Extramural Research and Training. And it is my pleasure to give you an update on the work we started related to report back of environmental health research results. I also want to acknowledge my colleagues, Katrina Korfmacher from the University of Rochester and Julia Brody from Silent Spring Institute, who are also on the Zoom to jump in to clarify any issues and respond to questions during the discussion part of today's conversation. So over the next 15 or 13 minutes now, I want to update you, get your input, and seek a few volunteers. So here we go. Next slide. As you may recall, in February, we had a 90-minute conversation on reporting back environmental health research results. The goal of the session are shown here on the screen, and we wanted to make sure that it was seen as a conversation and not a platform to really tell people what they need to do. It was rather a way of promoting a holistic conversation, to consider challenges and solutions, and to identify some possible next steps for the NAEHS. We grounded it in the following three events that had taken place over the last 5 years on report back of research results, noting that each one of these meetings had developed recommendations. The February conversation was designed to inspire action and consider ways in which NIEHS could take a leadership role in moving the discussion to action. So you heard Rick say just about 10 minutes ago that it really was a question of who's responsible for making the decision. So after this robust and engaging 90-minute conversation in February, Dr. Wojcik charged Julia, Katrina, and me with the following that you see. Oh, sorry, next slide. And next slide. Changing it on my screen. So this is the charge from Dr. Wojcik. Put together a set of recommended actions for NIEHS to consider. Bring it back to council. Let's make sure we're not having the same conversation in 5 years. Liam, Julia, Katrina, the ball is in your court. So this charge came forward. And so Julia, Katrina, and I took the ball. Next slide. After that council meeting, the three of us worked collaboratively to develop the draft document that council members have in your electronic council books called Moving Forward with Reporting Back Environmental Health Research Results. We acknowledged in that document that there is complexity and nuance to reporting back research results and that implementing the recommendations will not be easy nor quick. There are different kinds of research, community context, and participant characteristics that require different kinds of report back. However, there are near and midterm actions that we can start with and work towards the larger goals. Therefore, we drafted this document as a starting point, our proposed plan for moving forward and enabling NIEHS to become that recognized leader in reporting back environmental health research results. Next slide. We divided the document into three main themes that you see here: guidelines, training, and resources. We described the issues for each and propose some actions that can begin advancing the work of this field. Next slide. In the context of guidelines, we acknowledge that environmental health science researchers are already reporting back research results to project participants. However, we need to have clear understanding of what appropriate report back of research results looks like. While there are differences in the research projects, there are common principles that can guide the development of standards, models, and plans for diverse research scenarios. And to get us started, we outlined the following 5 possible activities that you see here on the screen. We could do a director's corner, communicate in different venues, such as the environmental justice request for information that's still out until June 18th on the importance of report back of research results. Developing consistent language for ES funding opportunities, write and disseminate a synthesis document of guidelines, and evaluate the impact of report back and share those findings. Next slide. In addition to guidelines, training is essential for appropriate report back. As noted in our last council, poor quality report back may be more harmful than not reporting back at all. So in that context, we outline the following possible activities with researchers who conduct environmental health research as the primary target for training on expectations for and appropriate conduct of report back. Though we do note that there are other key partners in the research process, such as reviewers, IRB members, as well as healthcare professionals. And so you see here some proposed activities: develop training materials, create reviewer training materials, develop and implement research partner training, and then reach out to IRB training programs. Next slide. And finally, we note the need for resources to enable the return of results. By resources, we mean materials and tools, as well as funding that can be used to integrate report back sustainably, equitably, and efficiently into environmental health science research. We posit that these resources should align with the goals of supporting environmental health action and reducing health disparities. 3 possibilities could be material repository of training materials, supplemental program, conference grants. And we recognize that there are some overlaps in these 3 areas, in these 3 themes, but together it provides a solid foundation for NIEHS to move forward strategically. So what's next? Next slide, please. So after the February council meeting, Dr. Wojcik had the opportunity to talk with Dr. Jorgensen at the NIH Office of Science Policy about our discussion during council. As a result, we shared with Dr. Jorgensen's team the document I've just described. They are very interested in what we've outlined and are supportive of us moving forward as their office works to develop similar guidance for the NIH. The key will be to coordinate with OSP, the Office of Science Policy, as we roll out our activities related to reporting back research results. As you likely noticed, the proposed actions do lack some details. That was intentional. We didn't have a lot of time, and we thought that it would be essential to have different perspectives and ideas when fleshing out the details of some of these activities. Finally, we wanted to make sure that council thought that this general plan of action seemed appropriate before taking the next steps. Next slide. So our timeline, the clock is ticking. I know Rick is looking at the clock, and starting with the end in mind, I will plan to stand before you again, hopefully in person, in September with more specific updates and concrete plans. In the meantime, we'll circle back with the Office of Science Policy based on this conversation today. We'll convene a kickoff meeting of NIEHS staff and council volunteers and perhaps other invited contributors. And we'll also work with Dr. Wojcik's office to publish a director's corner on the report back of research results. So hopefully we will have some more progress to be updating all of you September 13th or 14th. Next slide. So with that, thank you for your time and thoughtful consideration of this draft plan. And I'm going to open it up for questions and discussions. You can see 3 questions here that, that I'm throwing out to sort of get things started. So with that, I will turn it over, I guess, back to Pat.
Liam, do we want to give Julia and Katrina just a little time to make a comment?
Sure. If they've
been so passionately involved in this, we want to make sure that they have an opportunity to chime in if there's anything you want to add.
Hi, this is Julia. I'll just say quickly how pleased I am to see the council considering this work and appreciate Liam and others who've been involved in bringing it to the council's attention, along with Katrina and myself. My team has been working on report back for quite a long time now and appreciate the chance to see this disseminated and implemented by other teams across NIEHS.
Great.
I just want to second that it's really been a pleasure to have the opportunity to pull this together, partly because Julia and her colleagues and this larger group of people who have been developing the science of report back have really shown its feasibility. They've developed methodologies and tools, and it really is the time to scale it up, and particularly highlight the focus of the rest of this meeting on environmental justice and environmental health disparities, because like we told you last time, report back is the foundation of engagement. So with that, I'd like to hear your questions.
Okay, I guess we're opening it up to council members. Do you want to stop sharing the slides so we can see each other?
Good.
Well, then let's just thank Katrina, Julia, and Liam. They've worked pretty hard. And again, as I said, I don't want to be asking the same question about what are we doing.
So it looks like Terry. So Terry and then Janny.
Oh, there they are. Good. Go ahead, Liam. You can address the Q&A.
Thank you. Terry.
Thanks, Liam. Thanks for the presentation. Really great work and exciting. One of the questions I had referred to the aspect of reviewers and whether or not the OSP would be asked to engage with the CSR to make sure that reviews of proposals are appropriately, I guess, handled through the concept of report back. And how is that handled now? And is there a sense or a perception that this needs to be in any way augmented?
In terms of the general interaction with CSR?
Well, yeah, and then just overall reviews and whether or not there's sufficient expertise on the review panels for evaluating this particular aspect of community engagement.
So I know that in our preliminary conversations, yes, the notion of working with and providing supports for reviewers is critical amongst them. We haven't gotten into a lot of conversation with OSP on that at this time, but in the preliminary conversations, it sounds like it's also a similar important topic. Janny?
So thank you for the presentation. And this might be getting into the weeds, but I was just wondering how you are going to incorporate community advisement on this and review. And in particular, one size does not fit all. So trying to look at different communities that are really looking at getting this information back, whether they're urban or rural or different ethnic backgrounds, just how that might be incorporated in thinking about the process going forward.
For the overall process, or for the or in terms of developing guidelines, because I think that we have discussed a strategy, a potential strategy for collecting a variety of different guidelines or guidances on reporting back research results that could then take into effect the issues that you're getting at.
Okay, yeah, sometimes everyone thinks everyone does things the same way. So I think it's, particularly some of the populations we work with, they don't have internet or they don't have this or that.
So I think
I just wanted to add to that. Thanks, Jenny. That's a great question. And I think that's part of why we've emphasized so much the process of developing these and the right level at which guidelines should be. So they may be, Julia's group has just developed some really great tools with a lot of specifics, but also overarching principles. And I think we need to figure out at what level we're offering people principles and guidelines and processes of engagement, right, in order to develop what is appropriate in their case. So, and back to Terry's question, that at the end of the day, reviewers would be thinking more about the process of engagement and report back than specifically, does it check these boxes, for the very reason you mentioned. And also recognizing that there's room for a lot more research of trying out these tools and approaches with even more diverse groups, even though, there certainly has been quite a lot of work to date in pretty disparate situations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Irva, I see your hand up.
Yeah, hi. I just want to say that I think there's been, I looked at the materials from the last meeting that were presented and some of the directions that this was going, and I was really impressed with the depth of thinking around, developing these guidelines and the diversity of kinds of both situations and kinds of populations, but also ways to go about it. Yeah, I think it's very impressive. The other part of me, at the time I was thinking it's the same thing that, there's more and more to be done, but the money coming in is, stays kind of constant, in terms of sizes of grants. And so I think I was really interested in some of the implementation ideas, and I think supplements is a really great idea. For some of the reasons that other people I think have pointed to, that the review panels may not really know how to review that aspect of it. And it's, the kind of thing where it is a process. It's a process of learning how to do the process. As and every study and every population is a little bit different. So I really appreciate some of those really concrete ways that can really provide the resources for us to be able to do more of this and do it better. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Great job, Liam and Katrina and Jody, your long history. I'm Julia. Sorry, I got your first and last name together.
Well, thank you for those comments, Irva. Those are some really good points. I see Rick that has popped up on video, so I'm assuming that we're running out of time here. So
yeah, I think we're now kind of drifting into the break. So it's Pat, am I correct? We're running a little bit over.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe we can attenuate our break a little bit and ask people to come back on
sounds
schedule at 1:45. so we can get Dr.
Okay.
Perek's.
Well, but before we go into break, I just wanted to comment thanks to Katrina and to Julia and to Liam. You've done a great job, and I look forward to making some progress. And Julia and Katrina, don't be surprised if you get an email inviting me for an interview here for the Director's Corner sometime soon. So stay tuned.
Thank you so much. And we're going to need a lot of help. So as Liam said, we'll need some volunteers and you know, a lot of people from different sectors to help flesh out some of those details.
So if there are council members who would like to help move this along, please drop your names into the chat box so that we can follow up with you afterwards, because as the timeline shows, it's going to be quick. So thank you.
You got this director that's going to be holding them to a tough timeline. So thanks again to everyone. And Pat, I'll turn it back over to you to take us into the break.
Yeah, I'm going to suggest that we take a 10-minute break and get us back on schedule to hear Dr. Perek's presentation at 1:45, if we can. Thank you.
Sounds good. See you all soon, everyone.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm going to turn the podium over to Dr. Daryl Zeldin, the Director of our Intramural Research Program, to introduce our next and last speaker for the day. Daryl.
Thanks, Pat. So it's a pleasure today to introduce Dr. Anant Parek, who is the DIR speaker. So Dr. Parek is our relatively recently hired chief of the Signal Transduction Laboratory in DIR and a senior investigator in DIR. He received his medical degree and a DPhil degree in physiological sciences from Oxford University in the UK. He did his postdoctoral work with Nobel laureate Erwin Neher at the Max Planck Institute in Germany before returning to the UK in 1997 to become a faculty member in the Department of Physiology at Oxford. He became chair and director of physiology in 2011. He's won a number of awards and prizes for his work, including the Wellcome Prize, the G.L. Brown Prize from the UK Physiological Society. He's been elected into the Academy Europaea, which is the European National Academy equivalent, and the UK Academy of Medical Sciences, as well as the Royal Society. So the primary focus of his research is to understand how cells respond to changes in their environment, with a major focus on the universal intracellular messenger cytosolic calcium. He's discovered a variety of new principles underlying calcium signaling, including how spatially restricted calcium signals are generated, how they decode the calcium signal, how cells decode the calcium signal, and how events at the cell surface regulate gene expression in the nucleus, and how calcium signals are hijacked in diseased states. He's published nearly 100 peer-reviewed publications in a wide range of outstanding journals, including Nature and Cell and Molecular Cell and PNAS and Nature Communications, that have reflected the fundamental and impact of his work. So the title of his talk today is Crack Calcium Channels, a New Therapeutic Target for Environment-Induced Disease. So without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Parek.
Thank you very much, Daryl, both for that very warm introduction and also for the kind invitation to speak to this council. It's of course a great pleasure to be here. And I'd like to talk about one aspect of our work that describes how a type of protein called a calcium channel, the crack channel, could be a new therapeutic target for treating various environment-based diseases. And this work really started when I was still in Oxford. And we are continuing this here at the NAEHS. So what I'm going to show is a hybrid of work done in both institutions. And in this talk, I first want to give you a brief introduction to intracellular calcium signaling and why it's important. I then want to say a little bit about a type of protein that lets calcium into cells, and that's the crack channel. And then I'll talk briefly about the growing list of diseases that are linked with aberrant or abnormal crack channel activity. I then want to focus mainly on the involvement of the crack channel in the pathogenesis of environmental house dust mite induced asthma. Then I want to end briefly by speculating on some potential new therapies for asthma drawn from the work that we and others have been doing on the crack channel. Now, a rise in intracellular or cytoplasmic calcium concentration is used as a key signaling messenger in virtually every cell throughout the phylogenetic tree. Calcium is often considered the signal for life because it drives both motility of the sperm and subsequent fertilization of the egg. And as the animal develops, calcium can regulate a very broad spectrum of temporally distinct responses, ranging from neurotransmitter release and skeletal muscle contraction, which are manifest on a sub-milliseconds timescale after the rise in cytosolic calcium. Calcium over seconds to minutes can stimulate mitochondrial ATP production or energy production in the cell. And calcium can have a very long-lasting impact on cell physiology that can last hours to days after the calcium signal has terminated. And this is through calcium-dependent regulation of gene expression and control of cell growth and proliferation. Calcium also has a dark side in that it can cause cell death, either through the indiscriminate method of cell death, necrosis, or via the highly orchestrated series of events that unfurls during calcium-dependent apoptosis. And it turns out that cells can increase their cytosolic calcium, which drives a response. They can increase their calcium in one of two ways. They can either release calcium from intracellular bags or compartments, such as the endoplasmic reticulum, or they can permit calcium ions to enter the cell by traversing the cell's surface or plasma membrane. And it turns out that calcium release from the intracellular compartments or stores is transient, fully deactivating within a few seconds. And that's because these stores are very small and have only a limited capacity. And instead, it's calcium entry into the cell that's essential for maintaining the activities of all the calcium-dependent responses that I showed you a little earlier. And it's salutary to note that single-celled eukaryotes that lived over 1 billion years ago used extracellular calcium influx as a major signaling mechanism to respond to a range of external cues. So calcium entry is an ancient and highly conserved signaling modality. And commensurate with the importance of calcium entry, eukaryotic cells have evolved a variety of distinct calcium permeable ion channel in the plasma membrane. The two most widespread, perhaps the two most important, are the voltage operated calcium channels that are found in nerve and muscle, and the store operated calcium channels, which are found not only in excitable cells like nerve and muscle, but the store-operated channels are the major conduit for calcium entry in all non-excitable cells. So these include all the cells of the immune system. These are the endothelial cells that line blood vessels, the epithelial cells that line respiratory and digestive tracts, and the glial cells in the brain that create the right microenvironment for neurons to function. And the best characterized and most widely distributed store-operated channel is called the crack channel, which was first discovered by Reinhold Penner when he was working as a group leader in the Max Planck Institute in Göttingen in Germany in the department of Erwin Näher. And I was extremely fortunate in that when I left Oxford to do my postdoc in Göttingen in Herr Näher's lab, I joined just as Reinhold Penner had discovered the crack channel. So for me, it really was a case of being in the right place at the right time. And I've been working on the crack channel ever since. And crack channels are activated following stimulation of cell surface receptors that increase the levels of a second messenger that's called inositol trisphosphate, or IP3. IP3 releases calcium from the intracellular stores, and this results in the opening of the crack channels in the plasma membrane so calcium can enter the cytosol to drive cellular responses. I'm not going to say much about how the channels are activated other than the two key components of the crack channel are the proteins called STIMs on the store membrane and the ORIs, which are the pore-forming subunits of the crack channel in the plasma membrane. So the crack channel has two components, STIM and ORI. And work that we and others have done over the years has established that crack channels are indispensable for immune cell function. So we focused on a type of cell, immune cell called the mast cell, that's the component of both the innate and adaptive immune systems. And when an allergen comes along, it cross-links certain receptors on the mast cell surface. And this leads ultimately to the opening of the crack channel in the plasma membrane. And when the crack channel opens, we've shown that the calcium that enters has two kinetically distinct effects on mast cell physiology. The calcium first causes very rapid responses, which include degranulation of histamine-containing secretory vesicles and the de novo synthesis and secretion of paracrine pro-inflammatory molecules, the leukotrienes. And it's this combination of histamine and leukotriene C4 that's responsible for the very strong bronchoconstriction and pulmonary edema that occurs during anaphylactic shock and can, in some cases, result in death of the patient. And the calcium that enters through crack channels can have a long-lasting impact on mast cell physiology because it recruits calcium-dependent transcription factors, which then regulate expression of various chemokines and cytokines that coordinate the subsequent inflammatory response. And it's interesting to note that many of the chemokines and cytokines that are activated by calcium entry through crack channels are linked to the so-called cytokine storm that's seen in the lungs and pancreas of patients with COVID-19. And we in the lab are quite interested in various aspects of crack channel physiology and pathophysiology. We're interested in how the crack channel is activated, how the pore-forming subunit ORI can be gated or regulated by STIM. Several years ago, we found a major role for mitochondria in controlling crack channel activity. This remains a major interest of ours. We're also very interested in how calcium entry through crack channels can regulate gene expression. But what I want to talk about today is one aspect of our work that describes how environmentally derived allergens can target the crack channel to cause various changes in immune cell function and linked to the pathogenesis of asthma. Now, crack channels have been linked to a burgeoning list of human diseases. These include severe combined immunodeficiencies. So, for example, various point mutations in the gene encoding ORI1, the pore-forming subunit of the crack channel, has been described and results in SCID or severe combined immunodeficiency. Crack channels have been linked with the development of breast cancer, particularly the ability of the mammary epithelial cells to metastasize and form secondary tumors in the lungs and liver. Crack channels have been linked to the ability of the development of prostate cancer, whereby these cells can escape from apoptosis and then continue to grow and proliferate. Perhaps most controversially, crack channels are linked with a variety of neurodegenerative diseases, including Alzheimer's disease. And work that we and others did a few years ago point towards a central role for the crack channel in driving inflammation in the upper airways, including nasal polyposis and allergic rhinitis. And several groups, ourselves included, have identified a role for crack channels in allergic asthma. Now, allergies have reached epidemic proportions in the West. It's estimated that around 30% of the population in Western Europe and North America will suffer from an allergy at some point in an individual's lifetime. That's an enormous number of people. Allergy treatment is a major cost to all health systems. Allergies have huge socioeconomic consequences as gauged by the number of working days that are lost each year to allergy. The academic performance of school children with allergies is considerably lower than their non-affected peers. And new allergies are being discovered, for example, latex allergy. And allergies dramatically reduce quality of life. One allergic asthma sufferer, who was by no means an exception, told Asthma UK, "My quality of life is non-existent. I know this may sound extreme to a lot of people, but I would be prepared to lose an arm and a leg if it meant my asthma would go away." So asthma is a big problem, and it's a growing problem. And one major trigger for asthma, or what's called atopic or allergic asthma, comes from the house dust mite. And the house dust mite is the principal source of perennial aeroallergens in man that trigger asthma, and it's an environmental factor. House dust mite dependent allergies are strongly linked to the pathogenesis of respiratory diseases, including asthma. Around 2% of the world population is allergic to house dust mites. This is around 130 million people. And allergens derived from house dust mite and adjuvants from the house dust mite include several types of protease, immunogenic peptides, chitin, sugars such as lipopolysaccharide, and beta-glucans. But the signaling mechanisms used by house dust mite to target immune cells is largely unknown. The two main types of house dust mite, these are called Dermatophagoides tauronesus and Dermatophagoides farinae. The tauronesus is the one that's found mainly in North America and Western Europe. And this is the house dust mite that we've focused on. So how can house dust mite triggered asthma be reduced? Well, in principle, there are two ways to accomplish this. First, reduce exposure to the mite. This would be an environmental strategy. And the second would be to reduce the ability of inhaled mite allergens to activate cells in the airways. Targeting this would be a pharmacological approach. So let's consider the first strategy, reduce exposure to the mite via targeting the environment. Well, this has spawned a large and growing household cleaning industry that's currently estimated to be worth more than $2 billion per year. And suggestions include changing the bedding in the house around 3 times a week, washing with special detergent plus bleach, vacuuming all places where people sit, steam cleaning carpets and dry cleaning curtains weekly, adding various allergen barriers to ensheath or encase mattresses, springs, pillows, blankets, ventilate the house all year round, and so on. Install expensive air filters and air purifiers. And my favorite is to freeze after treating with a special spray for around 24 hours every fortnight, all non-washable bedding, toys, furnishings, and so on. Now, a meta-analysis on 54 trials by 2 Danish clinicians, Götze and Johansen, concluded chemical and physical methods aimed at reducing exposure to house dust mite allergens cannot be recommended. This is a very Scandinavian way for saying that it doesn't work, that all this is simply nonsense. So we think the second approach is the way forward, namely to reduce the ability of inhaled mite allergens to activate cells in the airways by developing a pharmacological or drug-based strategy. Now, this is quite complicated because several different cell types are involved in the development of asthma. It's not driven by one simple cell type and one target. So, for example, we know that airway epithelial cells play a major role in the development of responses to allergens. Goblet cells that secrete a lot of chloride, a lot of mucus mucus are involved. There are dendritic cells, mast cells, eosinophils, other types of immune cell within the lung, Th2 and Th17 lymphocytes. The airway smooth muscle also contribute to the development of asthma. And more recently, there's also evidence of neural input, particularly from the vagal nerve, in playing a major role in the development of asthma. So we have many different cell types involved, making this a complicated system. And the complexity is increased further because all these cell types can talk to one another and regulate each other's activities through positive feedback cycles. So for example, airway epithelial cells can release factors that activate mast cells, and the mast cells in turn secrete factors that activate epithelial cells, and the cycle continues. And this is true for many of these cellular interactions, making this a very complex biological system. So we asked a very simple question: is there a step that's common to the activation of all these different cell types? And the answer is yes, there is a protein that's required for the activation of all these cell types. And that turns out to be the calcium channel, the crack channel. And we've looked at this in various ways, but the most direct and unambiguous way to look at the crack channel in different cell types is to measure electrically the current, the tiny electrical current that flows through crack channels in living cells. And this can be studied using the patch clamp technique. And if we use the patch clamp technique and measure the calcium channel activity in the different cell types linked with asthma, we find that the crack current is present, and it appears to be identical in both its electrophysiological properties and in its pharmacological properties. So the fact that the same calcium channel that drives activation of these different cell types, the same calcium channel is found in the different cell types, suggests a very attractive therapeutic target. And that is that a drug against the crack channel would hit all these different cell types simultaneously. So our working hypothesis became that house dust mite-derived allergens activate crack channels to drive inflammation in the lung. And so we have looked at this using aqueous whole body extract from the house dust mite, which is commercially available. And we've used Dermatophagoides toronicis, the major form of house dust mite type in North America and Western Europe. The first approach we took was to see whether targeting crack channels in vivo in a mouse model of asthma was indeed protective. Because if it isn't protective, then there's no point trying to figure out how house dust mite affects crack channels. So we took a mouse model, we sensitized it to house dust mite, and then we exposed the mice to two structurally distinct crack channel blockers, Sinter66 or BTP2, and then subsequently we measured lung function and various markers of asthma in the mouse model, including eosinophilia, and looking at the histology of the lung. And this was in collaboration with colleagues at the Sadler Institute at UCSF. And what we find is that airway resistance increases substantially following exposure to house dust mite. So when the bronchi and the bronchioles narrow, as occurs during asthma, they constrict. And if a tube narrows, its resistance increases. And it's this narrowing that renders breathing difficult and accounts for the wheezing and the tightness of the chest that's characteristic during asthma. And you can see that when we expose the mice to house dust mite, there's a substantial increase in airway resistance or narrowing of the bronchioles. However, the crack channel blocker BTP2, it's the same with Sinter66, significantly reduces the narrowing of the airways. And when we measure, for example, eosinophilia, there is a substantial decrease in eosinophilia in the lung in the presence of the crack channel blocker following exposure to house dust mites. And we've looked at various other markers of airway disease inflammation in the lung, and these are all reduced significantly by crack channel blockers. If we apply house dust mite extract to different cell types associated with the etiology of asthma, in all cases, we find that the house dust mite triggers calcium entry into the cell. And this is seen in mast cells from the lung, in human airway epithelial cells, human T cells from lung, and so on. So house dust mite activates calcium entry in all these different cell types. So the question then is this the crack channel that's being activated by house dust mite? We believe it is the crack channel for a variety of reasons. For example, several drugs, a panoply of drugs that share the ability to block crack channels, all more or less suppress the ability of house dust mite to activate calcium entry in all these different cell types. But perhaps the best evidence comes from electrophysiological or patch clamp recordings of the crack current directly in these various immune cells. And if we apply house dust mite extract, we can activate the crack channels in these cells. And crack channels have various defining electrophysiological fingerprints. And in the different cell types, it is the crack channel that's being activated. Now, I mentioned earlier that STIM and ORI are the two key proteins that together account for the crack channel. So if house dust mite is indeed activating the crack channels, then a prediction would be that if we eliminate STIM and ORI, we should lose the calcium influx that's triggered by the house dust mite extract. And that's shown in this figure here. If we knock down either STIM1 or ORI1 using an siRNA approach, we can substantially reduce house dust mite evoked calcium entry. The opposite case should be true if we overexpress STIM and ORI, so we have more crack channels. And if we overexpress STIM and ORI, we now find that there's much more calcium entry following stimulation with house dust mite. So knocking down these proteins results in a loss of calcium entry. If we put more back, there's more calcium entry. And I think this shows the importance of the crack channel. And finally, the crystal structure of the crack channel was revealed a few years ago. And one very interesting feature of the crack channel is that there is a so-called gating spring that's essential for the opening of the crack channel. And this spans amino acids 81 to 85. So if we mutate these amino acids, so now the crack channel cannot open, what we find is that the house dust mite extract is no longer able to stimulate calcium entry compared with non-mutated crack channels. And I think this provides perhaps the best evidence that it's the crack channel that's been activated by house dust mite. So we believe that house dust mite activates crack channels, and this requires STIM-dependent gating of R. So the next question becomes what is the active component in the extract in the house dust mite that activates the channels? Are there multiple components? Are there multiple allergens in the house dust mite that activates the crack channel and hence the various cells of the lung? Or is one allergen dominant? And if the latter is the case, if there's essentially one allergen, then this raises the possibility of effective therapeutic intervention because we would be targeting just one component, one allergen, would make life much simpler. And some of the key components in the house dust mite extract are various proteins called DERPs. So DERP1 is a cysteine protease, DERP3, 6, 7 serine proteases. DRP4 is an amylase, another enzyme. No one really knows what DRP5 or DRP7 do. In the house dust mite, amongst the allergens and adjuvants are various structural proteins like chitin, mucin, and non-proteins include various sugars like lipopolysaccharide and beta-glucan. So we asked a very simple question: is the key component or components in the house dust mite a protein or a non-protein? And if it's a protein, is it an enzyme? So to look at this, the thing, it's very easy to simply denature or heat inactivate the proteins, leaving the sugars unaffected. So if we denature or heat inactivate the house dust mite extract, we completely lose calcium entry through the crack channel. So this tells us we're dealing with a protein, not a sugar. So which protein is it? Well, if we look at the various DRPs, there's a cysteine protease, serine proteases, and so on. So what we could do was use drugs that block different enzymatic activities in the house dust mite. So for example, we can block serine proteases with structurally distinct inhibitors like nafamostat or camostat. And what we find is that the ability of house dust mite to activate crack channels and hence stimulate these cells is more or less suppressed by serine protease inhibitors. But a cysteine protease inhibitor, E64 in this case, had no inhibitory effect. And it's interesting to note that nafamostat is used clinically in some countries, particularly in Asia, as an anti-thrombotic agent. So it's reasonably well tolerated in man. Now, house dust mite has several different serine proteases. So we knew we were looking for a serine protease, but which serine protease is it? And remember that DRP3 is a serine protease, DRP6, DRP9. Do they all contribute, or is there a disproportionate contribution from one? So to look at this, we collaborated with Holger Kramer, who ran the mass spec facility at Oxford, and we ran fractions, and we looked at the ability of different fractions to activate crack channels. And then for each fraction, we subjected them to mass spec to see which serine proteases were in the active fractions and absent from the inactive fractions. And we reached a really striking conclusion. Every fraction that was active had DRP3. So A13, A11, and every inactive fraction didn't have DRP3. It had other serine proteases, but it didn't have DRP3. So we concluded from this, DRP3 was the critical component in the house dust mite extractor, the house dust mite that activated crack channels. So we ordered recombinant DRP3, and we fully expected recombinant DRP3 to activate crack channels. And so we applied recombinant DRP3, and recombinant DRP3 is frightfully expensive. It costs several $1,000s. But we did the experiment, and to our shock, we failed to see any activation of calcium entry in the various cell types associated with asthma in the lung. That was Albert Einstein who defined madness or insanity as doing the same experiment 10 times and expecting a different result each time. And we were totally insane because we did this experiment hundreds of times, trying to see whether, or trying to show that DRP3 could activate house dust mite, and it simply never did. But then we realized we'd forgotten our sort of first year medical school gastroenterology. And that's because serine proteases are stored in an inactive form in the body, in the pancreas, for example. And that's because they are stored in what's called a pro form, an inactive form. And that's to prevent these proteases from being prematurely stimulated in vivo and then leading to autodigestion. And to activate proteases, including DRP3, which exists as a proform, it has to be cleaved, in this case by DRP1, to release the active serine protease. And what we had applied without realizing was the pro-DRP3, not the active DRP3. And that's why this was always negative. So we then used a combination of pure DRP1 and pro-DRP3. DRP1 in blue never caused any calcium entry. Pro-DRP3, as you've seen before, doesn't do anything. You put the two together, so DRP1 cleaves pro-DRP3 to activate it, we could see robust activation of calcium entry through the cracked channels. And what we've subsequently found is that if we activate cracked channels in various, so in airway mast cells or airway epithelia to house dust mites, we see a prominent increase in various pro-inflammatory cytokines, including IL-4, IL-5, IL-33, and these are more or less completely prevented by the cracked channel blocker Sinter66. And we can recapitulate almost completely the effects of house dust mites simply by applying DRP1 and DRP3. Now, if you apply house dust mite to these lung mast cells, something very interesting happens. So this is an electron micrograph of a resting lung mast cell. And after exposure to just a few minutes of house dust mite, you can see these remarkable projections appearing on the mast cell. And these are characteristic of cells that undergo migration. And in fact, if we measure mast cell migration, house dust mite within just a few minutes substantially increases the ability of the lung mast cell to migrate. And this is partially suppressed by knocking down the cracked channel or by blocking the cracked channel. And this is quite unexpected because mast cells are not thought to migrate into the lung following exposure to house dust mite, but this in fact turns out to be the case. They do, and through a cracked channel driven pathway, at least in part. So in terms of therapy, we believe that cracked channel blockers should be quite effective in treating house dust mite induced asthma and by extension, various forms of lung disease. There are various cracked channel blockers currently available, but these are more for research purposes, not for use in the clinic. At the moment, there is no cracked channel blocker in clinical use. Experimentally, Sinter66 is very effective in inhibiting cracked channels and downstream responses in various deceased human tissues and animal models, but it couldn't be used in humans because it's associated with liver toxicity. But I don't think the future looks bleak. On the contrary, I think it looks very bright. Developing cracked channel blockers for the clinic is a very active program in several drug discovery or in several pharmaceutical companies. For example, Calcimedica have just now started a phase 2B clinical trial with cracked channel blockers targeting, first of all, acute pancreatitis and now pneumonia in COVID-19 patients. Risen in Switzerland also now have a molecule entering phase 2A clinical trials. Almirall in Spain, GlaxoSmithKline in the UK have a very active cracked channel program specifically for airway disease. So I'm reasonably optimistic that a cracked channel blocker will emerge for clinical use. But nevertheless, there are other possibilities to target the signaling pathway that we've stumbled upon, whereby house dust mite can activate cracked channels and lead to contribute to inflammation in the lung. I mentioned the cis-serine protease inhibitor nafamostat, which is used in Asia as an antithrombolytic. We found that house dust mite via DRP3 activates a type of receptor called the protease activated receptor, and it's an unusual type. It's the PAR4 receptor. And antagonists to the PAR4 receptor have now entered clinical trials. So we would think that a PAR4 receptor antagonist with a cracked channel blocker could be quite effective, perhaps even in a combination therapy, which would allow lower doses to be applied. And one of the things we've set up here at the NAEHS is a high throughput screen to look at FDA approved libraries to see how we can interfere with this pathway using repurposing drugs. So to summarize, house dust mite extract activates crack channels in various cells in the lung associated with the development of asthma. It activates these responses within seconds. We've identified a very important component in this pathway as DERP3. House dust mite induced calcium entry through crack channels contributes to the key pathological features of asthma in a mouse model. And we believe that targeting the channel should be a novel therapeutic approach to reduce responses in a variety of airway cells to allergens. And we focused on house dust mite, but we have some preliminary results that also show that this is relevant to allergens from cockroaches and shellfish. And we're running screens now here to identify FDA-approved drugs for repurposing and new molecules from agnostic libraries for development. And much of the work that I've shown you was done by Yupin Lin in Oxford, and she's moved to the NIHS, she's here. And the high throughput screen is being led by Diane D'Agostin here in collaboration with Srini at the NTP program, and other members of the group, of course, very actively involved in the other projects that we're very interested in developing. Thank you.
Thank
Wonderful
you, Dr.
talk.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Breck. I'm sorry, Daryl, did you want to speak?
I was just going to moderate the question answer.
Oh,
but if you
okay,
could do
please go ahead.
So use your yellow hand if you have questions. Maybe I'll start with the first one. So help me understand on a molecular basis how the active form of DERP3 activates crack. The channels have been the structure is known. Is there a specific so on a molecular basis, how does that happen?
That's a very good question. So we thought for a long time that the serine protease might cleave the crack channel directly, ORA1, and somehow lock it in an active state. We did a lot of experiments to look at this, and we found no evidence for that at all. And it was then we stumbled serendipitously on the protease activated receptors, because we found other proteases, non-serine proteases, couldn't do this. And the PAR receptors, so for example, thrombin in platelets activates a PAR2 receptor, it cleaves it, it removes an auto-inhibitory domain. And so the receptor becomes active, and it couples to GQ phospholipase C to generate IP3. And we found that in the lung mast cells and in airway epithelia, they express PAR4 receptors. And we showed that the PAR4 receptor was cleaved by either house dust mite extract or DERP3. And when it's cleaved, it generates or stimulates the production of the second messenger, inositol trisphosphate. And this then leads to the activation of the crack channel. So in answer to your question, Daryl, it's an indirect mechanism. The house dust mite, DERP3, the serine protease, PAR4 receptor to the crack channel. It's not directly on the crack channel.
Questions from council members or others? Terrence?
Thanks, Daryl. Thanks, Dr. Breck. That was very interesting work. I'm wondering, have you guys, first of all, looked at ILC2 cells in this whole story of asthma and sensitivity to house dust mite, and whether or not the crack channels are also modulated in the innate lymphoid cell 2 compartment? And then secondly, I note, because I got interested in this ahead of time, that thiol redox status seems to be very important in the functioning of crack channels. And that brings up the whole notion of agents, environmental agents that cause oxidative stress, or those that can actually modulate redox poise like sulforaphane and other NERV2 activators, which have been shown to be very important in preventing asthma.
Yeah, so the first question, we did use facts to try and identify IL-2 in the innate lymphoid type 2 C cells from the lung. They do have stimuli. We haven't been able to patch clamp these cells because they're very small and they're quite difficult. But the calcium entry is there. It's blocked by crack channel blockers and so on. As for redox, and that's a very, very good question. The ORI1, the pore-forming subunit of the crack channel, the mast cell in particular, is very sensitive to ROS. There's a cysteine residue that faces the extracellular region that can be, once oxidized, the channel activity falls. A homologue of the crack channel ORI3 is more resistant. It doesn't have this residue. We haven't looked to see yet what redox potential does to the house dust mite PAR4 signaling pathway yet. It's something I think that would be very worthwhile doing, but we haven't had time to look at it just yet.
Thanks.
Okay, there are no other questions. We're right at 2:30, so maybe we'll turn things back to Pat, and let's all thank Anand for a wonderful scientific presentation.
Thank you.
Yes, that was very good.
Presentation. Very
Yes,
nice.
and something, a well-told story. Thank you for for presenting it to us.
Thank you.
Rick, I believe that brings us to our 2:30 in time. Any last
Okay, well, I'll
minute
tell you
words
what, I'm
before-
going to take the virtual gavel and adjourn today's meeting for now. And I look forward to seeing all of you tomorrow morning. Thanks, everyone, and great presentations today by others. And so we'll look forward to hearing more. Take care. Bye.